Hi, everybody. Today we're going to talk a little bit about giving presentations and how we can kind of combine and master the elements of content and delivery. We've been doing presentations and speaking publicly in this class, and you've certainly given presentations in other classes before, but we just want to kind of review and cover some of the basics to get us up to speed for our own individual presentations, our elevator pitches, as well as the final presentations that you'll be giving on your career report topics. So I just want to run us through some basics of content so that we are kind of prepared to give a presentation that has really good organization, really good structure, and communicates the information that we need to communicate in a clear and coherent way. Again, as we've been saying, for all of our documents that we've created so far, one of the first questions we want to answer is who is our audience? We want to learn as much as we can about our audience so that we can meet them where they're at. Is this an audience that knows a lot about your topic? Is it an audience that doesn't know so much about your topic? Is it a peer audience, a superior audience, a subordinate audience? And again, you may have multiple or conflicting audiences in a room where you give a presentation. So trying to think a little bit about how to target your presentation for your audience is really important. As we've discussed before as well, you want to really think about what your purpose is. Are you trying to persuade your audience of something? Are you trying to inform them about something? Usually there's a little bit of a combination of both things, and you want to make sure that you are clear about what you're trying to achieve. There are two basic rhetorical principles that can help us to kind of structure any presentation that we are giving, right? The first is that we want to make sure that we relate ourselves to the topic. If we get up in front of a room of people and we give a presentation, we want those people to know that that topic is something that's important to us. It's something that we know a lot about. We have some credibility in standing there and talking about the topic. So we want to make sure that we let the audience know how the topic is connected to us in a serious, pertinent, or personal way, right? The second part of this is we want to make sure that we relate the topic to the audience. So we want to make sure that we make it meaningful to that audience, right? Audiences are much more likely to listen if they think that we're well informed, if they know that we're connected to the topic, and if the information is also relevant to them, right? So we can talk a little bit about what our credentials are, what our qualifications are for talking about a particular topic. We can talk about why the audience should pay attention. We may want to relate the topic to something that's local or specific to the audience that we're talking about. Or we can, describe some of the people that the topic we're about to engage with. Who are the people that that topic might be important or interesting to. Just like in our papers, right, there are multiple parts of a speech or a oral presentation. The first most important part is the introduction, right? It is what generates interest and attention. It's what relates the topic to the presenter or the audience. And we want to make sure that the opening of our presentation, just like the opening of any written work that we produce, grabs the reader's attention and or the listener's attention and lets them know where we're going to be going over the next X, Y, and Z minutes, right? The agenda helps us to do that. It should be part of our introduction. It's a preview of what we're going to be talking about, and it forecasts the organization of the presentation. In oral presentations, this is especially important because we don't have, as an audience, we don't have the text that we can flip through to remind ourselves kind of where we're at or to see where we're going next. All we have is the structure of the presentation as it unfolds in front of us. So you want to make sure you tell your audience right from the get-go where they're going to be going, right? That preview gives them kind of you can think of them as signposts to let them know we're at the beginning, we're at the middle, we're at the end. And that is really important because it helps the audience to be kind of well situated within the presentation, right? If we have no idea when a presentation is going to end, we might get a little antsy too, right? So you want to make sure that you give your audience some really good kind of road signs to tell them where they are. Again, another portion of your presentation are going to be the kind of main points that you're trying to make, right? In a presentation, you want to make sure that you don't have too many of these. 2 or 3 are going to be all that you can manage to cover in a presentation of 5 to 10 minutes. And you'll want to make sure that you kind of balance them. How can you make the different things that you're trying to say kind of more or less equal in importance? One of the ways to do that is to give them more or less equal time. So you don't want to spend a huge amount of time on one element and no time on maybe the second point. It just feels a little bit lumpy. And another way of thinking about this is, what's the most relevant stuff that you want to include in your presentation? You're not going to be able to include everything that showed up in your career document, in your career report. So you're going to have to select those things that you think are the most relevant, the most interesting. And you can always think about your presentation as kind of a preview or an advertisement for the document, right? What are the things that you can tell an audience that are going to also make them want to go to the document and read further about the things that you've talked about? Again, as in written work, transitions do a lot of the heavy lifting in a presentation. They're the bridges which link one idea to the next, one part of your presentation to next, or in a group presentation, the transitions are what are going to link one presenter to the next. And so you want to give some time to your transitions. We tend to, as we're planning presentations, think very carefully about the major pieces, but we're often not as good at being well prepared with the transitions. Strong transitions can really do an enormous amount of good for a presentation. It kind of smooths it out and makes it feel like one big coherent piece. The conclusion is the final portion of your speech, and one of the things that you want to think about is this kind of brake light idea, right? We want to make sure that we're not just slamming on the brakes at the end of a presentation and saying, okay, that's it, we're done, right? We want to give the audience a sense that a presentation is coming to a conclusion. So you want to build towards that conclusion. You can also do something like an instant replay, right, in which you kind of review the things that you've been talking about in your presentation. Sometimes, in a conclusion, you want to end with a quotation or a story or a kind of striking statement that's going to leave an impression and make somebody, want to behave or act in a way that you've recommended. It's always nice in presentations to kind of link back to something that you've said at the beginning. Sometimes that kind of parallel construction can be really helpful because you kind of bring whatever it is that you're talking about full circle. It's always nice also at the end of your presentation to end with an opportunity for questions so that those in the audience can follow up if they have questions, concerns, comments, those kinds of things. All right? In terms of organization, the order of your main points is really important, and it can be tricky. You may have to try several approaches before the best one kind of becomes obvious. Your book suggests several possibilities and examples of each type. So, for example, a topical sequence is very common. It gives you the opportunity to kind of play with the order a little bit more than the other ones. In a topical pattern, you break a topic up into kind of natural groups. Maybe there are pros and cons, or there are 3 types of something, or 2 reasons you should do something. And this will be motivated in part by the specific content that you're dealing with, right? A time sequence can also be really effective if there's kind of a natural time progression to what you're talking about. Freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. Spatial relations can work for some presentations. So if you're moving kind of physically in a progression from place to place, or you want to talk about the way things work differently in different parts of the industry. A cause and effect pattern can be very effective as well. If you do X, Y, and Z, this will happen. If you do A, B, and C, this other thing will happen. And the problem solution report, or the problem solution organizational structure, really kind of sets things out as here's a problem and here's a way that you can solve it. Monroe's motivated sequence has kind of a problem solution organization to it. It's usually reserved for persuasive speeches in which what you're trying to do is to advance a particular course of action or to get people to do something in particular. And the way Monroe's motivated sequence works is that you start by trying to get the audience's attention by using kind of a dramatic or a serious or a thought-provoking introduction. The second part of Monroe's sequence is that you demonstrate the need for your proposal or solution. So you kind of have to make the case that there is a problem and that there is a need for something to change, right? The third part of this is to present a solution that you think is going to satisfy or solve the problem you just identified. The fourth part is where Monroe's motivated sequence is a little different than others. Monroe's motivated sequence asks you to spend some time visualizing the outcomes, the positive outcomes of the proposal that you have suggested. So for example, if you're suggesting that students take advantage of the Career Center by going to networking events, right? You may want to kind of help them visualize or set the scene or tell a story about how doing that, going to those networking events, has a particular positive outcome, right? And finally, the final kind of punctuation to Monroe's motivated sequence is that the conclusion of your presentation in this kind of persuasive manner should really request an immediate specific action. You want to do something that helps the audience to kind of agree to or support a specific thing. You want to get them on board with doing what you have asked. So for example, if your persuasive speech or presentation was about getting people to donate blood, you would, for example, as your action item at the end, say, there's going to be a blood drive on campus in 2 weeks' time. I really want you guys to think about getting involved in that. You might even create kind of a sign-up sheet or something so that you can email people to remind them about that blood drive later on, right? The important thing is that there's some kind of commitment that is asked of the audience at the end of Monroe's motivated sequence. So in terms of organization and content, you'll want to spend a lot of time kind of thinking about how those things are going to work together. Content is part of the important part of giving a presentation, an oral presentation, but delivery is important as well. We want to think about what happens when we actually kind of get up there in front of a room full of people and begin to speak, right? So we want to think about some of those elements. There's a number of different ways that people can deliver presentations. One strategy, one of the modes of delivery for presentations is to memorize an entire speech. And I think this is a really bad idea. Memorizing speeches may seem like a good idea. It makes you feel confident that you know exactly what you're going to say in exactly the order that you're going to say it. But there are two problems here. One is that memorized presentation often sounds very, very rote. It sounds a little bit robotic because you already know what you're going to say. There's not a lot of spontaneity there. The second problem with a memorized presentation is that if you forget something, you get stuck, right? And if you forget something, sometimes you feel you have to go all the way to the beginning of a presentation in order to kind of begin again. And it's not going to work, right? You want to avoid memorization as much as possible. There's kind of a false confidence that comes with memorization. So I'm going to ask you guys not to engage in memorizing your presentations. The second strategy that we might use is considered kind of a manuscript approach, right? We see this sometimes at academic conferences and elsewhere, book events, book readings, you'll see manuscript presentation. And in a manuscript presentation, somebody sits down or stands up and actually reads to you. I don't find manuscript presentations particularly engaging or exciting. You can't make good eye contact. You're reading, and frankly, as an adult human being in the world, instead of listening to you read, I would rather just read that document myself, right? So send it to me and I'll read it in my own time. Manuscript presentation, some folks are really good at it and there are contexts in which it is appropriate. But for what we're doing here, I want to encourage you not to use a manuscript style. The style that we're going to prefer here is the extemporaneous speech. It's the kind of presentation that I've been modeling for you all semester, in which one has a basic plan of what you're going to do, but you engage in kind of a spontaneous conversational way of talking about that with your audience, right? Usually you're working from an outline or some keywords or some notes, right? I'll often have notes in front of me. I have the PowerPoint also to help me to remember what I'm going to say in what order. But being freed up from knowing the exact words in the exact order I'm going to say them appears more spontaneous. It promotes eye contact and kind of a conversational tone. It allows for flexibility so we can move on from one thing more quickly or less quickly. But it requires a lot of practice. And one has to kind of get comfortable with the idea of being there, without a whole lot of props, so to speak, right? So you want to be really well prepared so that you can kind of wing it when you walk into the room. Extemporaneous presentations are the kind that I'm going to ask you guys to really focus on and prepare for this class. A final kind of presentation that's important is the impromptu presentation. Impromptu presentations are ones in which you are asked to get up in front of a room of people and you are not prepared to do that, right? We want to create opportunities to practice that kind of thing because in the workplace, opportunities for impromptu speaking are really important. Folks who are better speakers, better public speakers, and better spontaneous speakers tend to have more professional success than folks who aren't. So impromptu speaking has challenges, right? When we're put on the spot, we tend to freeze up a little bit. But the more we kind of practice impromptu speaking, the more likely we are to become more comfortable and to succeed with it, right? I'm not asking you to do impromptu presentations in this class, but it's something to think about as you're kind of practicing your presentation skills. All right. Moving from the different ways that we can deliver, we want to think a little bit about the elements of delivery, right? Part of the delivery that we engage in when we're doing presentations is the use of our voice, right? We have vocal delivery and we also have nonverbal delivery. So we'll talk about each of those things. The first thing that we want to focus on is the rate of our speech. Think about yourself and about your tendencies as a speaker. Some of us are fast speakers. Some of us are slow speakers. I'm kind of a fast speaker. I don't know if you guys have noticed. But one of the things that we want to do is we want to think about making sure that we're speaking at a rate or we're speaking at a speed that allows people to feel relaxed, that allows people to feel comfortable, and that also allows people to understand us without feeling that we've left them behind, right? The average rate of speech is about 100 words a minute. And so for a presentation of 5 to 7 minutes, that would give you, just as a ballpark, about a minute each for the introduction, the conclusion, and each of a few main points. So that's one way of thinking about breaking up your timing, right? And imposing some kind of limits on how fast you speak. And the other thing we want to think about is the kind of the duration of stuff. How long do you want to spend with individual words, with individual sections of your presentation? Sometimes we want to spend a long time with a word, right? Or sometimes we want to, speed through something a little bit more quickly. Knowing that people speak at about 100 words per minute is also helpful to us because one double-spaced page at kind of 12-point font is about 200 words or about 2 minutes. So you can start to play around a little bit with knowing how long a presentation is going to be based on how much text you expect to cover, right? Another thing we want to think about are our pauses, right? Just as white space gives the eye an opportunity to rest, in presentations we also have to use silence in order to give our listeners the opportunity to digest and to hear what we've said and to have it sink in. So we want to make sure that from time to time we have moments of silence in our presentations. This is really hard. Our instinct in presenting is to fill up the quiet with noise. I remember I had a professor in college. His name was Arvind. He's an amazing professor and a brilliant man. And you would ask a question in class. And what he would do in response is he would go like this. So you'd ask him a question. You'd say, "So what was that about?" or whatever. And he would say, he would say nothing for minutes and minutes and minutes at a time while he was thinking of his answer. And then his response was like this perfect, beautifully crafted, genius piece of rhetoric, right? And it was kind of amazing. And it always made people a little bit uncomfortable at the beginning because the silence, we didn't really know what to do with that, right? So we want to kind of think about pauses. We want to think about silence and attend to it carefully in our presentations. There are two kinds of pauses that we can use in presentations. A silent pause is the preferred kind. It gives us an opportunity to rest and to understand and to let things sink in. But most of us, when we pause in presentations, use vocalized pauses. And those vocalizations are things like, uh-huh, and all of the little kind of blippy things that we say as we're moving through a presentation. Each of us have vocalizations that we use. You guys know mine is right. Each of us will have a vocalization that we feel comfortable with, and we can't get rid of them entirely, and it's part of the natural form of speech. I'm doing it right now, probably more than usual because I'm paying attention to it, but you want to target your presentations and just try to think about how you can kind of reduce the number of vocalized pauses that you use. The rhythm of what we say can be really effective. Rhythm has to do with kind of the tempo of what we're saying, whether we use kind of alliteration and repetition of words. It also has to do with the pitch of what we say, so kind of the upward and downward inflection of the things that we're saying versus something that's more kind of monotonous and straightforward. So we want to kind of think about setting the mood of our presentation by using our voice, by using rhythm and pitch in order to emphasize kind of the mood or the tone of the content. Volume is important. We need to speak loudly enough for people to be able to hear us, and at the same time we don't want to shout. This has to do with the contours of the room that we're presenting in, how many people are in that room, what kind of technology we're using. So whenever possible, it's a good idea to check out the room that you'll be presenting in before you have to give a presentation, so you can kind of prepare yourself to speak as loudly as you will need to make yourself heard. Enunciation and pronunciation are really important, right? We want to make sure that we are speaking the words that we speak in a way that kind of is accurate and is understandable to folks. There are words that are just really hard and that may hang us up. And my advice to you about that is not to get too hung up on the specific pronunciation of a word. You can use Google. Google's amazing. You type in a word and it will play the word for you in people's voices so that you can hear what the pronunciation is supposed to be like. I sometimes find that helpful if I have to pronounce something that's difficult or unfamiliar. But the main thing with pronunciation is when we get stuck on pronunciation, we kind of go back and forth, right? We'll pronounce something kind of differently as we move on. And so what I want to say to you is that if you have a word that's giving you trouble, pick a way to pronounce it and then just stick with that, right? We will notice a missed pronunciation much less than we will notice something that's being pronounced differently over the course of a few minutes. All right. The only exception to this is when you're talking about people. It is really, 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 really important to get people's names right, and so that's something you want to practice. It's always okay if you're dealing with people who are present in your audience to ask them how to pronounce their names before you, say, introduce them in a presentation, or find out through other means how to correctly pronounce somebody's names. We want to make sure that we give people kind of the dignity and respect that they deserve for that. Moving now from the verbal elements of delivery, I want to just give you a few reminders about nonverbal delivery. Eye contact is really, 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 really key, right? Eye contact is hugely important. It shows respect. It lets us know that we can trust the things that people are saying. Eye contact is what allows us to also give and receive feedback in a presentation, and so eye contact is really important. The balance of eye contact is sometimes a little bit tricky, right? You don't want to be staring at one person the entire time. You want to make sure that your eye contact kind of takes in the entire room of people that you're speaking with. One trick, if eye contact feels uncomfortable for you, is that if you look at somebody's ears rather than into somebody's eyes, usually in a presentation context, they can't really tell the difference. So if you are concerned about making eye contact with folks, but you want to give the impression of eye contact, that is one way to do it. Another way to do it, if you're nervous in a presentation, is to make eye contact with a couple of people in the room who are known to you, right? You can always look at me. I will always give you some nice, good, positive feedback. So, with eye contact, it's something to practice. One of the things to consider is that you want to make sure that you're not making things more difficult for yourself. If you put a lot of information in your notes or you're trying to read from a script, it's going to be very difficult for you to engage in good eye contact with your audience. So don't give yourself a harder time than you need to by giving yourself a lot of things to read. Now, this means the audience too, right? In the classroom in particular, we want to make sure that we are a supportive audience for our colleagues and for our friends. And so in presentations, I'm going to ask that computer screens are shut down, that we have everything cleared off from our desk except for pen and paper so that we can take some notes. But you want to make sure that you are, giving the person who's at the front of the room or the people who are at the front of the room your respect, your attention, and the kind of benefit of your feedback, right? Another important nonverbal element of your presentation are going to be your facial expressions, right? Facial expressions tell us a lot about the kind of emotional tone of what we are dealing with, right? We can't not have a facial expression, so it makes sense for us to think a little bit about what our facial expressions contribute to the content we are trying to deliver. Mainly, you want to make sure that your facial expressions are consistent, right? You don't want to be talking about something like the death penalty with a huge smile on your face. That would be kind of strange, right? So you want to make sure that your facial expressions and the content are kind of lined up and consistent with each other. In terms of attire, you want to make sure that you are, as in an interview, that you're presenting yourself in a way that's consistent with the message you are trying to communicate. So, it's important for your attire to kind of reflect on your credibility and kind of support the claim that you're making that you're an authoritative person to speak to on the subject that you're speaking to. In this class, you do not have to spend a lot of time thinking about attire. I don't need you to show up in a suit or anything like that. Keep it classy but comfortable. And you are students presenting to other students, so your kind of everyday attire will be more than sufficient. Other nonverbals are important for us to think about as well, right? The extent to which people move around a space, gesture with their hands, cross their legs, all kinds of things. All of these different elements of nonverbal communication come to us like kind of naturally, and some of them come to us when we are more nervous. The important thing about nonverbals is that they are natural and that they're consistent and that they don't interfere with the message that you are trying to communicate. I'm a big gesturer, you guys will have noticed, and I walk around a lot, right? That is not comfortable for everybody. So whatever is the most comfortable for you is what you should do, right? If you kind of don't know what to do with your hands, instead of this, one of the things that you can do is to keep your hands kind of clasped together or keep them behind you, right? There's a lot of different ways to use nonverbals effectively, and they don't all include having to be kind of big in your actions or your presentation. All right, so these are just a few things to think of, kind of a refresher from your basic comm course, all of those months and years ago. And I'd like you to think about kind of applying these elements of content, verbal delivery, nonverbal delivery to your next assignment, which is the elevator pitch, right? The elevator pitch, the kind of idea of the elevator pitch is that imagine that one day you're walking into an elevator, and into the elevator with you walks an expert in your field, or the person who's hiring for the job that you most in the world want to have, right? you have a couple of minutes, you have an opportunity to say something to this person about who you are and to sell yourself. And so the question that we have is, what do you do in that situation, right? You happen to sit down next to somebody on the subway or at the deli counter or at a cocktail party. You're introduced to somebody who's influential or important, and you want to be able to sell yourself to them, right? The elevator pitch is all about creating a nice, clean, coherent narrative about who you are and what you do. So that if somebody turns to you and says, "So, what do you do for a living?" You don't say, right? You have a good answer for them. For our class, the requirements for the elevator pitch are that it should be anywhere between 30 seconds and 1 minute. 1 minute is the absolute maximum, and I will cut you off at 1 minute. You are supposed to introduce yourself and what you do or what you would like to do, right? You're going to spend a few seconds talking about whatever your greatest strength is, as well as making a claim for what you want and why you want it. This is a lot of material to cover in just 30 seconds to 1 minute. So you're going to have to make sure that you kind of are very careful, are very articulate, are very clear about these items. You can look all over the web for example elevator pitches. There is a hyperlink here on the slides, and I will link it also on our Moodle page to a site that gives you a couple of examples of elevator pitches, but more important than that, gives you a critique and asks you to kind of think about the ways in which you would improve these potential elevator speeches, right? So please prepare your 30-second to 1 minute elevator pitch. What we'll do when we meet each other next time in class is we will run through them and give each other a little bit of feedback. All right, have a good time with it. Enjoy, practice, and I will see you next time.